Hello, I'm Odin, and today I'm making a Star Wars helmet. It's the Heavy Infantry helmet from the Mandalorian. This is the way. I've been working on my pattern. I started by using a lot of reference from the Hot Toys action figure, of course, and working up exactly how I want the shapes to go. The first thing I knew I needed to get right was the dome that goes on top. And I wasn't sure how I was going to pull this off just by putting duct tape and aluminum on my head, well, head cast. So what I actually did was I pulled a pattern off of an existing helmet, only using the top round that I needed, enlarged it on the computer so it actually fit me, and made the dome pattern. So I'm good on that. Then I started laying out the face and the back of the head. But when I cut the back, I just made it a rectangle. And so it comes on as being very straight, which, well, straight up and down, it doesn't flare out, which is okay, but that's not quite right. And then I did the same thing to the face. So when I put the face on, it's right up against my nose because it should flare out a little bit and not just be straight up and down. I redrew both the patterns to put a little bit of a curve at the top. So now I can take my new set of patterns, including the dome for the top, cut it out of some good foam, and build a new one. I'm using 10mm HD foam for most of this build. I trace all the helmet dome pieces. These were made to be symmetrical, so I don't need to mark right and left. When I trace the faceplate, I punched little holes in my pattern. That way I can mark where the lines of the cheeks meet. I can connect the dots and draw the lines in later. With the back of the helmet, I have a cutout for the top of the vent and notches to connect the lines to on the bottom. I cut all the pieces out, holding the razor knife at a 90-degree angle using a straight edge whenever I can. For the domed pieces, I heat them with a heat gun and then curl them over my planishing stake. I'm just trying to create a compound curve on the flat foam. They'll glue together into a dome shape much easier that way. All pieces are glued together with 2 coats of contact cement. The first layer of cement seems to just absorb into the foam. After it dries, I apply a second coat over the first and let the glue dry again. Then I can stick the parts together, following my guide marks, lining them up so I don't pull one side more than the other, which will warp the seam. The last seam is a little harder to do, but the dome is now done. In between the steps of the dome, I actually worked on the vent that goes in the back of the head. I cut out the space for the vent and cut a new plug from some 6mm foam. For the vents themselves, I cut a strip of 2mm foam, 18mm wide, and then made 7 24mm parts. I had drawn a line on the foam at 12mm. This is where I want to put the glue for each of the vent pieces, on the smaller side. The topmost vent, I actually cut down to 12mm. On the 6mm thick plug piece, I coated it all with glue. That way, when I glue them all together, each vent glues down, leaving 12mm exposed. Because I didn't put glue everywhere, they actually pop out a little, actually looking like a vent. The top vents will get fully glued down. I glue the vent piece in, making sure the backside is flush, and mash the seams together. I want these to stick. I don't want them to open up when I bend the panels. I cut out the cover panel and make it longer than it needs to be on purpose. I fix the top in the right spot and gently pull on the bottom to keep the sides parallel. I thought it'd be easier to glue it on this way, and I can cut the excess off later. There's a round detail at the top, so I'm going to super glue a washer right onto the foam. Oh, yeah, give it a second to set up. I connect the dots on the face for all the cheek and visor lines. At this point, I still don't know exactly how I'm going to cut out these cheek panels. But I can cut in the angles that go just under the eyes. I closely follow the line that I drew on the face and generally try to follow the corner in the back. If you do this, keep your knife sharp or just use a new blade. I still expect to sand down the edges to get it really smooth. I also cut out the guide marks on the face visor. The cuts are just for fun now. I'll cut them loose before I glue in the visor at the end. I'm skipping ahead some now. I looked at a couple of ways to make the cheek angles and decided to cut the cheeks out with a straight 90-degree cut. See, that's curved. Well, that actually curves real easy because I'm going to want to glue that in first and then put the cheeks on. I like that idea. 2 coats of glue later, and I stick on the back panel. It's easy to line up with the center of the vent on the center seam on the dome. The back panel comes around to almost halfway on those smaller side dome panels. Heavy's dome sticks out further than the back panel, so don't line them up perfectly, inset the back panel just a couple of millimeters. I glue the face on the same way, centering it along that center seam on the dome, and then glue it around to fit up against the back panel. And the face sticks out a lot farther than the dome. Don't line these up either. I started cutting some scrap foam to figure out my cheek pieces. Long story short, after 3 different rounds of foam cutting and like 4 or 5 revisions of the cardboard pattern, yeah, that's not the one I need, I think I'm good to go. But I do need to cut an angle on the sideburns in order to get that panel to sit right. All the sides on the 6mm cheek panels need to be cut out on an angle, and I'll mark which way they need to go on the pattern, which you can download from a link in the description. I highly recommend cutting these angles over some scrap foam like this. The tip of my blade lasted a lot longer. I used 2 layers of contact cement on each seam, sticking all the panels in place. I started under the eye, then I did the sideburns, finishing with the panel in the face. All right, something I think is important to point out, all these angles I kind of figured out, right? I didn't use a computer to specifically get the exact degree of angle that I needed. So as a result, on the inside, I don't have my pieces completely mashed down flat. They're glued along the edge to get a sharp corner, but I didn't force them all flat because I don't want the panels to end up kind of bowed, because if it sticks too much on one end, I'll get this concave shape as it comes out to the other. And it could go the other way around as well. It's just really kind of hard to show inside the helmet how the pieces don't completely line up to the edges of the helmet. But don't worry about it, don't panic. If that happens to you as well, it probably will. It's just kind of the way mine fit together. The actual cheek panels are a little easier to figure out. They'll just glue in behind the other panels. I did use a rotary tool to flatten out the panel edges. I don't want the cheeks to be warped and look like a potato chip. Since I have the tool out, I go ahead and grind down the seams over the dome as well. I also gave sanding a try. It worked for what I wanted, but it made this foam sort of fuzzy. For a moment, I thought I could heat gun the fuzz down. The biggest concern here is opening my seams back up that I just sanded down flat. I think I don't want to do this. An hour and a half later, I have the cheeks in, and I can glue in the panels that go along the jawline. These are also the 4th revision for this shape. I cut a strip of 2mm foam, 10mm wide, and glue it over the top center seam of the dome. Now, the ear pieces are a little easier. I make them as stacked panels. I add a couple of 2mm panels on front and stack a few more on top. The top box is made from 10mm foam that has a 45-degree angle cut on one edge. I just glue the boxes together first and then grind down the extra bits so that all the sides match. I also grind a bevel onto the lower panels. I penciled in where I want to stick the parts to minimize excess glue spill on the head. A rangefinder is more layers of foam just stuck together, and the edges are beveled with a rotary tool. The rangefinder mast is some scrap pieces I quickly glued together. It's kind of a post with a beveled top. I glue the mast to the rangefinder, and then I glue them both to the helmet. I use my wood burner and a metal ruler to make a couple of panel lines on the ears, and the 6 little divots that go on each side. I decide that I really do need to putty over the seams of the dome, so I carefully cover the seams first, and then I notice that the fast dry acrylic caulk is really smoothing out all the fuzz, so I just smear the whole dome with it. Let's give that a chance to dry, and then I can paint it. After all the caulking is dry, I sand it down so it's smooth. I mostly just use a piece of sandpaper, but in some spots I do use a detail sander. There are several dents on the helmet. I use one of my chewed up grinding bits and dig out the dents. And it's ready to be painted. So I cut out the holder on the visor and sand the cut ends smooth. 2 coats of black Plasti Dip, and I really like how smooth the dome came out on the helmet. Then I spray painted the whole thing Oxford blue. I used some dark metallic acrylic paints to cover over the vent and the ears and the rangefinder. It actually takes 2 coats. And I mixed up a light blue for the cheek panels and filled them in. The middle of each ear is a bright silver, which covers over the dark metallic nicely. I also cover the back vent in silver, but not completely. I kind of wet brush it, leaving some of the darker metal color to shine through. I fill in the dents and add silver to some of those sanding errors that I made. Now they're dents too. I start to add really heavy chipping along the crest. I'll get around to putting more on later because this guy is really beat up. I mix up a grayish metallic navy blue for the faceplate. My color could have been a little grayer, but the different blue is nice from the dome. I let the paints dry and I start to mix some water with some black acrylic. And I start to really heavily black wash the helmet. I put a lot on the silver parts. And I really paint it in on the corners. I also dab the paint and even wipe some off as I go. I really want to weather the helmet, not just stain it a new color. I even rub a little bit on the light blue. Now sometimes when I do this, I use liquid shoe polish instead. The shoe polish will actually stain the parts with a really dark black-brown color. With the acrylic black wash, the colors don't change, but it does look a little more painted. I beat up the helmet even more, adding more silver paint chips than I normally would, because this is how beat up his helmet looks. The final piece is the visor. I make a cardboard template to fit where I need it. And I want a template because I only have one welding visor that I can cut up. I wasn't able to order one off of Amazon because when I looked, they were sold out. I went to a local welding supply store and they had one tinted face shield. So this is the one that I get to make work. But before I can cut it, I need to cover it in blue tape because I don't want to scratch it. And I have to do the inside as well. I traced the visor template onto the tape so I can cut it out with the bandsaw. But then I had to trace it again on the inside because I couldn't get the visor to fit on the saw the other way. Thankfully, the visors are made from polycarbonate, so they're easy to cut. And this one's actually pretty rigid. You can get thinner visors that you can just cut with scissors when places have them in stock. Mandalorian helmets are pretty popular right now, I guess. A quick test to see if the super glue will hold the visor in place. I scratch the edges of the plastic so the glue can hold better. And then I glue the brow in place first. I made a mark on the visor where the center line is and align that with the center seam in the dome. And then I just hold it for a few minutes until the super glue really starts to set up. Then I let it sit for 20 minutes. And then I can add more glue on the edge of the visor and glue one half of the face down, making sure it fits to the chin. Then I wait again and repeat the other side. When I cut the visor, I kept the factory edge at the chin. You can see the edge there. This way, it looks nice and clean. Most of the items I use for this build, I picked up locally. I put a part list in the description. The Mandalorian Heavy Infantry Helmet. It's the Heavy Infantry helmet as seen in The Mandalorian. I really liked this guy. I really liked the deep cheeks and the beefy rangefinder. Plus, I didn't see any of the tutorials for this particular helmet. I know there's some tutorials out there for Fett's helmet and for Jaren's helmet, and Putters Props has a tutorial that covers both. But I wanted to make this guy because this is how Odin makes. I have spoken. So, what did you do last night? I stood around, waited for glue to dry. I want to thank Jax Jessup, Sean McEnany, and all of my Patreon supporters. You guys really do make this show possible. If you like the video, don't forget to subscribe. Have an idea for something for me to make? Please leave a comment below. And if you make any of these projects, you can send me a picture.